Hi, everyone. Thank you all for standing by, and welcome to the last installment of our AIS webinar series entitled Keep Your Aquarium Free of Invasives webinar, hosted by the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network's Organisms and Trade Project. I am Jill Gentis-Finicki from Ohio Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory, and joining me today is Greg Heitzroth of Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I would like to take a few moments for the webinar viewers to get you familiar with the technology. During our presentations, all of you will be in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat feature located on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll collect them and pose them out to Greg at the end of his presentation. Also, if you have any technical questions at any time, please feel free to use that chat feature. We have a great group, a diverse group representing individuals and programs from the Great Lakes and around the country. Please keep those questions coming throughout the presentations, and we should have a great Q&A session. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant Organisms and Trade website for later viewing. Also, we will post a webinar survey in the chat feature toward the end of the presentation. Please take a few minutes after the webinar to fill out that survey. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Greg Heitzroth, OIT Outreach Specialist from Illinois Indiana Sea Grant and Illinois Natural History Survey. Greg has been leading the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant OIT, or Organisms and Trade Great Lakes Restoration Initiative project, for the past 3 years, which focuses on outreach programming for aquarium hobbyists and water gardeners. Prior to this appointment, he was with the Chicago Botanic Garden for 3 years working with citizen scientists. We are delighted to have Greg here today to talk about what people can do to keep invasives out of their aquaria. Greg, I'm going to unmute you and hand you over the, oh, you have it. You are ready to go, Greg.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, great. All right, so as Jill was saying, my name is Greg Heitzroth. I'm with Illinois Indiana Sea Grant and Illinois Natural History Survey, and today is going to be focusing on aquariums and, aquatic invaders in aquariums. So a little bit about who I work for. Let me see if this works. Okay, great. So pretty much Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, our mission is to combine research, education, and outreach to empower Southern Lake Michigan communities to secure a healthy environment and economy. Sea Grant is under the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. There are 32 Sea Grant programs in the United States. They are associated with coastal states and land-grant universities. We are associated with University of Illinois and Purdue University. I'm also with Illinois Natural History Survey. It is a Illinois Guardian of Biological Resources. So essentially part of this mission for the Natural History Survey is to provide information to the public to foster understanding and appreciation of our natural heritage. So pretty much I'd like to tell people I work for the University of Illinois because it's a lot easier than saying all of this every time I introduce myself. So typically I really am an academic professional working for the University of Illinois, working for these two great organizations. And typically I would say my main role is to mediate between multiple stakeholders dealing with organisms and trade, so the trade of aquatic species. Mostly focusing on ornamentals used in aquariums and water gardens. So I work with hobbyists and retailers, scientists, and everyone to come up with what we see as a happy medium between environmental responsibility and economic sustainability. So pretty much aquatic invaders, as I like to describe it, are plants and animals that have been introduced from outside their natural geographic range into areas where they haven't been before, and then they're able to establish, then spread, and then harm ecosystems. And so pretty much it's moving a species from one location into another where they haven't been before, and then ecological, economic impacts occur. Some examples that have been in the news a lot in the last 20 or so years include Asian carp. and zebra mussels. Asian carp, I often hear them referred to as the flying fish. So have you seen the flying fish on the news? It's typically Asian carp. More specifically, it's silver carp. It is an introduced species from Asia, introduced into the aquaculture trade to control algae, and instead has escaped into the United States waterways, causing lots of ecological problems, such as reduced food web stability, essentially, but also problems for recreational boaters as they do jump and they get pretty large. They have been known to break bones and knock people unconscious while driving boats, which is not really a great thing. And also, they do cost a lot of money every year for the United States. So in 2014, I believe the United States spent about $60 million on control and also planning and research on Asian carp. Zebra mussels also have been around for a while. They were discovered in the Great Lakes in the 1980s. Since then, between the discovery and 2004, about $1 billion was sunk into zebra mussels. Essentially, much like Asian carp, they are very prolific filter feeders and disturb the food web, but they also do things like litter beaches with sharp shells, so they do have human impact implications. So how does a species go from being just a plain aquatic species to being an aquatic invader? So there's kind of a transitional period for transportation, introduction, establishment, spread, and then impact. So these are the typical steps. The way I'm doing scientific literature citations in my presentation is that I read some source articles and I'm referring to those, even though within those articles like Kohler and Lodge 2001, they have a lot of other citations that this information is coming from. Just for the sense of simplicity, I'm just saying Kohler and Lodge. So if you're interested in these citations, I would Google Kohler and Lodge 2001 and throw in the word aquatic or aquarium. Same thing with any of these other citations I have. So I'm doing it pretty stripped down today. So aquatic species to aquatic invaders, first they have to be transported. So species are transported from outside their native ranges. So people have been very good at moving things around in the last 100 or so years. So the rapid growing world population, more people traveling worldwide for recreational activities, and globalization, so the movement of goods between countries has been very large. This is an image down here. This is an image of flight plans in 2013 as posted on openflights.org. There's about 60,000 flight routes in the world as of the date of this picture. Human transport, novel species, so when they're going from place to place, people like to move things around. Whether or not it's intentional or accidental, it really depends on the species often. Some things are very desirable, like ornamentals or even agricultural species. About 50,000 biological invaders have been estimated to be introduced into the United States, and this is intentional and accidental. A lot of these are agricultural. This image is watercress, which is a noxious weed in 40 states in the United States, but it's also an agricultural crop at the same time. And so there have been a lot of species being moved around for various reasons. Again, going back to Asian carp, they were introduced into the aquaculture industry for algae control or anyhow. So the transportation, again, of aquatic species often are ornamentals, and about a third of the aquatic invaders in the world have been called ornamentals at one point or another, such as water hyacinth. And so the reasons why things are moved around, whether or not it's agricultural or ornamental, is really varied upon the species. Some pathways in which species are being moved around or the intention for the movement are things like trade, recreation, shipping industry, or others. So mostly I focus on the aquariums and water garden part of the trade. There's some live food being moved around. I'm not really going to focus on that today. So mostly it's just going to be aquariums, but these are all ways in which species are being introduced internationally. So the aquarium trade is a very big trade. Internationally, there are millions of dollars that go into this industry. That should be millions, not million. I apologize for that typo. The U.S. is potentially the largest market for ornamental fish in the world. In 1994, there was an estimated 9 million households with an average about 9 fish per household. And so that is a lot of fish in the United States. And the estimated price tag on the fish hobby was about $91 million, and 35 of that was just for livestock. So the rest goes into things like the actual tanks or the substrate or lighting and filters and such. So there's a lot of money in the aquarium trade. There's a lot of variety in species or livestock that are being traded. There's an estimated 730 different species of fish being imported. And the majority of these are about 150 are what account for the most or the bulk of the trade. So there are a lot of species that are not as common in trade. In the Great Lakes Basin alone, there's probably an estimated 5,000 species in trade. So this is not just fish, it is fish and other organisms such as crayfish, snails, and turtles and such. So once the species has been transported from its natural range into an area where it hasn't been before for various reasons, such as aquarium trade, species have to be introduced before they become invasive, and so they actually have to make their way from that trade into the environment. So that could be natural areas or man-made environments, such as canals and such. So the way they go from aquariums into public waterways or natural waterways is either through intentional or accidental release. So there have been lots of cases of escape from cultivation. So rearing ponds or hatcheries sometimes flood and get into public waterways. Mostly what I'm going to focus on is the deliberate release from aquarium hobbyists. And so this is part of the trade pathway. The facilities is definitely an important part of it. It's just not what I'm going to focus on today. Other people have been looking at that part much more in detail than what I have done with my career so far. So also other good people are doing that. So maybe another webinar in the future on that topic. But anyhow, so retailers are unlikely a source of introduction, according to one study, where typically retailers don't want to give away their wares for free to nobody, essentially. So they will hold on to stock or try to sell it as low as they can, or even return it to distributors. So it's unlikely that retailers are part of that pathway. So again, aquarium hobbyists. In one study by Meyer and Seekamp, actually funded by this project where surveys were done throughout the Great Lakes states, they found approximately about 25% of hobbyists at one point or time had released an aquatic species into the environment in some manner or fashion. Whether or not they continue to do that is a big question, but 25% about admitted that they had in the past. Another study found in Montreal about 7% of the hobbyists admitted to releasing aquatic species. But not just admission, but there's also some evidence that aquarium releases are happening because you're starting to see species like pacu and red-bellied piranha that are not able to survive in the Great Lakes show up. And these are two species that are in trade for the aquarium hobby. And so this is a little bit of evidence that aquarium dumping is occurring. So why are people releasing? So this is a big question. Like, why would anyone release a red-bellied piranha into Lake Michigan? Most people are seeking a humane way of disposing of unwanted pets. So people get them because they think they're really cool or they look interesting without really thinking about how large they're going to grow or how aggressive they're going to be. And so they eventually turn into unable or unwilling to keep that fish. And so they're really looking for a way of getting rid of it. And they don't really want to be cruel to it to essentially dispose of it. And so people typically will dump it for that reason. Some of the reasons that have been explored to why people have released fish, so it's the large size, too large for their aquariums possibly, aggressive behavior. Some people are just bored with the fish, as in it's just not as pretty. I overheard an interesting conversation at a pet store once where someone was returning a puffer fish because it didn't puff up enough or more frequently. Typically the aquarium owner was saying that they wanted it to be puffed, and the retailer was pretty much saying they're not puffed when they're happy. They're puffed up when they're stressed or angry or threatened. And so this hobbyist wanted it to be more puffed more frequently. And so some people don't get what they want out of their hobby, so they release them. Sometimes people have a hard time keeping their organism from being sick, so they have a poor health or a poor environment for the fish, and they get tired of trying to treat it, and then they release it. But also moving, it's much easier to put a dog in the back of your minivan than it is to put a bunch of fish in the back of your minivan when you're moving from state to state. And so some people will dispose of them when they're moving. So transportation and then the introduction through release. The next step is the establishment of the species once it's been introduced. So this is survival and reproduction in new habitats. So what makes an establishment likely? In the Great Lakes, the background image is cold water, frozen water. So really it's going to be thermal tolerance is the first line of defense against a lot of species being introduced from the aquarium trade into the Great Lakes. Most aquarium fish are going to be tropical or subtropical. Typically don't really, aren't okay with water below 18 degrees Celsius. About 9 out of 308 aquarium fish in one survey said that they were likely to survive in the Great Lakes. So there are some species that are in trade that can survive in the Great Lakes, even though it is very cold up here. And I think Jill said there are some people outside the Great Lakes region who may be on this webinar, so taking in mind that a lot of this is going to be Great Lakes specific. So what makes an establishment likely? It's also not just temperature, but it's also opportunity for introduction. In my previous slides, I hope I stressed the point that it's a very large industry, it's a very popular hobby, and there are cases of known release and people actually releasing species. So it is occurring, so it's a lot of opportunity for introduction, but also just the widespread use and how far this hobby extends trade-wise also really increases the potential for contact with a lot of freshwater and marine habitats. Another factor often is invasion histories. So if you're moving a species that has been shown to be invasive in another system or a similar system, it's very likely that you're going to get that invasive species in your system as well, especially if it's in trade in that region. And so some species have a similar habit, and it's not just environmental conditions. So in establishment in the Great Lakes, I like this slide because it's kind of a transition through time. So you start at the top here. In 1993, about 10 aquarium species have established in the Great Lakes. So that's reproductive and surviving. In 2005, there was an estimated 11 species. And then last night, when I was looking at the Great Lakes Great Lakes Aquatic Non-Indigenous Species Information System, also known as GLANCIS, which is much easier to say for me, there were about 6 species reported as being established through the aquarium release or aquarium trade in the Great Lakes. And so you're seeing this number slowly creep up. Another factor is propial pressure. So this is essentially the number of individuals introduced is a good indicator of invasion success. So here on the left, you have 2 fish. If you release 2 mating pairs, it's likely that they may reproduce. Whether or not they're going to have an established population, that's a whole different question. If you introduce 1,000 of those, they're more likely to become established. Is pretty much the idea of propial pressure. Part of the propial pressure and the aquarium trade is actually how often things are sold. So more popular species are more likely to be released, so it may increase those propial pressure or increase on propial pressure. So more popular species might show up more frequently than less popular species. Again, going back to the previous example, you could have 2 individuals like the one on the left, and if they are prodigious reproducers, obviously these are goldfish, but just imagine it's the whole 5,000 species in trade. If you have 2 individuals that are able to reproduce like exponentially or in very high numbers, they may be able to create very large populations or increase propial pressure that way. So from that Gertsen et al. Study that I keep bringing up in this presentation, there was an estimated 10,000 species or 10,000 fish released each year in Montreal alone. That was the estimate from their model of the aquarium trade and release. And so species that are more likely sold are more likely to be released according to that. But if you think back a couple slides to larger, more aggressive fish are more likely to be released, that's also another factor to consider too for which species are likely to establish. Aquarium species selection can kind of occur. There's some suggestion that the aquarium conditions sometimes select for larger adults, which are more commonly in trade than like the younger species or individuals, but also the transportation and collection aspects of the aquarium trade sometimes calls out weaker individuals of the species. And so pretty much the idea here is that sometimes the aquarium trade may be selecting for larger reproductively, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, they're large reproductive individuals that are pretty hardy. So that is another interesting aspect of aquarium introductions and establishment. So once you have the establishment, whether or not it happens, if you have distribution beyond the established point, that's another step towards being an invasive species. So if you have introduction and establishment without spread, there's a chance that it won't be invasive, the species. If the species spreads widely, it's very likely that species is going to be invasive. There is a little bit of a subtle difference sometimes between established non-invaders and invasive species, and sometimes that can just be time, as in the established population hasn't been there long enough to spread, and so sometimes it is a factor of time, and so there's a lot of questions involved in establishment and spread. So pretty much, this is my "it's complicated" slide for the last two parts of this process, because invader characteristics, their interactions with the invaded community, will sometimes determine how wide they spread and how established they become. And various characteristics, even in the species, but also in those environments, can really play big factors in this. So it could be tolerate a variety of habitat conditions. Species can be rapidly grow or reproduce rapidly or in large numbers. They can be aggressive or compete for resources, or they can even lack natural enemies or pests in new ecosystems. So there's a lot of factors that go into from introduction to becoming invasive. But one thing that most invasive species share are impacts, so impacts on ecosystems, economies, and human health. So typically, United States, there's about 137 billion annual costs for invaders. This is for all invaders, including terrestrial, going back to that 50,000 established individuals or individual species in the United States, figure from earlier in the presentation. About 14.2 billion annually costs for aquatic invaders, just aquatic invaders in the U.S., and about 5.7 billion for aquatic invaders in the Great Lakes. And so this includes everything from control measures to loss of commercial and sport fish stock. Environmental impacts are pretty broad, depending on the species, obviously. So decreased ecosystem function overall, which can include competition with native species. They can threaten endangered species, reduce species diversity, change animal interactions or animal community interactions. They can be important factors in global loss of biodiversity, which can be second only to habitat loss, so that removal of habitat. So in a sense, they're kind of removing habitat as well, or available habitat for some species. Abiotic factors can include things like degraded water quality, increased debris buildup, changes in sediment chemistry, water flow, and movement problems with these ecosystems. Human health impacts. I picked a couple species that aren't commonly used in aquariums, but I have heard them used in aquariums before. This is, on the left here, this is channel apple snail, and this is water chestnut. So channel apple snail has been known to spread diseases and parasites that can cause everything from severe headaches to death. The impaction of waterways of water chestnut can reduce water movement and increased mosquito habitat. The four-pronged barbed nutlet of water chestnut can actually cause wounding, and there's some anecdotal evidence of there being some cases of drowning associated with the species. And I say anecdotal because I believe the scenarios where people were swimming through water chestnut infested areas and drowned, and whether or not it was blamed directly on water chestnut or some other factor is debatable. Some examples of species that are in the aquarium trade specifically, I brought in a couple that weren't. So hydrilla was introduced from Asia. It's an aquarium oxygenator. Sometimes you'll see it found as a hitchhiker in species. So essentially, sometimes when you go to a nursery and you buy a plant or you get a shipment of plants, sometimes you get additional species that you weren't intending. And hydrilla has been found to be one of those species. It's kind of a nursery pest. It establishes pretty much vegetatively. It's very brittle. It will break apart and grow easily from those fragments. And so that's part of the problem with the species. It can grow very deep, much deeper than most native species. Typically, it can grow to about 20 feet below surface level, where most natives stick around 8 or so. So it's fine with low light levels, which is possibly why it was introduced into the aquarium hobby. About 80% of the biomass is then produced about 1 to 2 feet from the surface. It shades out native species. Florida spent about $15 million annually on hydrilla control, and about 2 lake infestations cost about $10 million in 2005. So, Anacharis, another commonly used aquarium plant, was introduced from South America. Again, as an aquarium oxygenator, it's widely sold. Only recently has it been prohibited for sale in Illinois and Indiana. It's established in many states. It can survive very low temperatures, down to 1 degree Celsius, and can grow or survive under ice caps. So surviving the Great Lakes is not a problem for it. Pretty much it crowds out native species, much like hydrilla, and restricts water movement. So also increasing mosquito habitat is a side effect of that. Goldfish, everyone knows this is an aquarium species, but it's also been introduced through a lot of different trades over the years, including the bait trade, but also it was intentionally stocked for largemouth bass forage, and has also escaped from hatcheries raising these fish for various purposes. It's been around since the 1600s. As you can see in this map, it is in a large number of the states, if not all of them. And pretty much really what it does is it reduces visibility for sight-oriented predators and disturbs aquatic vegetation. It will root around in the bottom of the lake and disturb the habitat. This is a picture from Colorado recently in the news of what seems to be a potential release of aquarium goldfish that now has to be controlled in a lake out there. And so whether or not the full effects of goldfish are being felt all over the country is a big question. But it is a species that's known to establish and spread. Chinese mystery snail. Let me see. It's a species from Asia. It is a live food and aquarium industry organism. It was introduced into the Niagara River, likely from aquaria or potentially live food. It's kind of hard to point the finger in a lot of these cases to exactly how things have been introduced. The impacts include clogged screens, intake valves, and fishing nets. I like to include the species often just because it's my soapbox for labeling things with scientific names. Often this species is sold as Japanese trapdoor snail, and often it's called Viviparus malleatus. And so there's a little bit of taxonomy questions that have arisen recently, and people thought there used to be separate species, but now it's the same species. And there's a lot of outreach about Chinese mystery snail, but Japanese trapdoor snail seems to be ignored infrequently, but also very commonly sold. So that was a lot of examples and a lot of information. So invasion threats increase with time, especially for the aquarium trade, because as the trade species pool expands, so does the likelihood of introducing new invaders. So the more species that are being spread around or introduced into the trade or moved to new continents, it's likely that new species are going to be invasive from that trade. But also, the icing on the cake there is also that climate change predicts warmer winters, essentially opening up doors to tropical and subtropical aquarium species. Obviously not all of them, because I don't know if Illinois is going to be like Florida the next 50 years. I don't think so, but it will probably open the door for some of the species in trade. So really, with that in mind, an ounce of prevention is definitely worth a pound of cure in this case, especially thinking back to those price tags of even hydrilla for 1 year in Florida. So, because once the species is established, the impacts grow over time and space are usually irreversible in perpetuity. This is a nice quote from David Lodge. Pretty much meaning that once you have an invasive species, you pretty much have that species. Even if you are able to remove it, which is sometimes impossible or very difficult, you don't really always get that same ecosystem back that you started with. And so really preventing the introduction and spread of these species is really a very important part of preventing invasive species from causing ecological economic harm. And it's also very, so it's more cost effective, but it's also just more effective generally than trying to remove species. So some practical steps for people to follow. First of all, follow state and federal regulations. This is a good first step for a lot of people. So there's a resource that Illinois Indiana Sea Grant has been developing with Great Lakes Sea Grant Network representatives and Great Lakes Restoration Initiative money, and it's called takeaim.org. It is in development, but there's a state and federal regulations database up here in the left-hand corner. It is currently down. We're having some technical issues, and hopefully to have those resolved in the next month or so. But we have state and federal regulations that should be on here. I also want to point out that state and federal contacts are right next to it. And there's a lot of other good general information about aquatic invaders in the marketplace at takeaim.org. So avoiding known invasives is really a good step as well. So even though it'd be great if all invasive species were regulated or prohibited in all states in some way, it is not the case. There are a lot of species that you can still buy in many states that are prohibited in other states. So avoiding purchasing known invaders is really a simple thing that a lot of people can do. Really, the internet is a good tool. Some websites that have great invasive species information for aquatic species is the USGS Non-Indigenous Aquatic Species Database, also known as NAS. If you just Google NAS, you'll get the hip-hop artist, but if you do USGS NAS, you'll find this database, so that's a little point right there. Glancis, the website I mentioned before, where I queried to see how many species are established in the Great Lakes, is also a really good database for Great Lakes-specific establishments. So purchasing alternatives to known invaders is a good way of thinking about your hobby. So of course, we want people to have their water gardens and their aquariums. We don't want people to not have those businesses anymore in the Great Lakes. We just want people to purchase non-invaders, essentially, or species that are known to cause problems. So really, we want people to figure out which species are non-invaders, and part of that is using tools developed by land managers or scientists for land managers to assess the risk of species, and using that information to create lists for hobbyists, essentially. And so, Gordon et al. Published a plant risk assessment tool. Ruben Keller and Chris Gantz are the people who I've been working with on this part of the project, this Great Lake Restoration Initiative project. So that's mostly who I know, but it's Gordon et al. Is a publication. So there's about 36 questions that they came up with for assessing plants. So it's ecological, competitive ability, dispersal modes, so on and so on. So going back to that, it's complicated for establishment and spread, slide I had before. So this is, yeah, so it's a very complicated model that they have. So the answers to the questions, essentially it's a way of scaling or creating a value corresponding to the qualities that make a species more invasive. So higher scores mean more likely to be invasive. So we turn this into a publication. So the What's in Your Water Garden Walla card, so this is a list of species from the risk assessment, and these are some of the non-invasive species, but also some native species for the Great Lakes region. We've been distributing these through retailers in Illinois and Indiana. We've provided these materials to other Great Lakes Sea Grant Network members, hopefully to distribute them throughout the Great Lakes Network and Great Lakes states. We are working on one for aquarium hobbyists at this moment, so look for that probably in about a month or so. This is a water garden specific one, and there's also a poster that should be going up in a few retailers around the region. For mollusks, another risk assessment, pretty much it's, will they survive the Great Lakes? Yes. Will they reproduce more than 60 individuals a year? Yes. If it's yes to both of these, it probably should be avoided. This information is then, again, disseminated through a brochure. So purchase these on Invaders, this list up here, and then avoid these on Invaders. And so this is essentially the species that came out as being able to survive and have high rates of reproduction. A lot of these are actually nuisance species in the trade, such as the phasia, European phasia. I'm not sure if you can read that. It's pretty small on the screen. But it is essentially just a nuisance species that comes in on things like your aquarium plants. But most of these species I have found for sale on Craigslist in some way or another. So pretty much it is like a potential spread through the trade, intentionally, that is. Fish, again, it's a series of questions that lead to a yes or no, high or low impact answer. So whether or not they survive in the Great Lakes, again, whether or not they are invertivores or piscivores or just piscivores, and whether or not they have high rates of reproduction. So these are the issues for fish. And we haven't created anything for this quite yet. We are going to actually amend the the mollusk brochure. So the snails, clams, and mussels are going to get an additional species of fish. So there are very few aquarium fish that are potential invaders. I believe the model predicted about 3 as potential invaders, and that will be vetted a little bit more in the next month or so, and then released hopefully by the end of September. And so that is avoiding purchasing, but the other side of it is actually preventing the introduction, so that aquarium released by hobbyists. And so 2 ways of doing this is actually creating alternatives to release for people, and also how to dispose of things. So there are a couple campaigns, educational campaigns, that are trying to achieve that, of disseminating information on alternatives to disposal, or alternatives to release and proper disposal, such as the Habitatitude campaign. So this is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service national brand of Don't Release campaign. So you can go to www.habitatitude.net for additional information. Be a Hero Release Zero is part of the Illinois Aquatic Invasive Species Prevention campaign. Be a Hero Transport Zero is the other part of this. And so it is a statewide campaign to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. Transport Zero is more focused on aquatic recreational water users, and this is more focused on aquariums and water gardeners, the release part. It is not quite complete, so releasezero.org exists, but it doesn't at the same time, and will go to nowhere. It's coming really soon. I would look for some more signs of this in the next couple of months. Oregon Sea Grant has a teacher-specific campaign, Don't Let It Loose. That is a really great campaign. It has a lot of nice information specifically focused for teachers. So a lot of these campaigns actually discuss what to do with your aquarium species, and part of that is also what to do with elements of your aquarium. So essentially, one step of this is to disinfect or find new use for unwanted water. So your aquarium water, when you're disposing of it, don't dispose of it down drains, essentially, because storm drains, because a lot of storm drains lead to public waterways or even retention ponds that can lead to public waterways. And so there's a lot of untreated water being spread around through storm drains. So if you do dump your aquarium, dump it on your compost, dump it on your lawn, don't dump it down storm drains. If you want to dump it down your toilet, we suggest or recommend adding a little bit of bleach to sterilize it or attempt to sterilize it. Big unwanted plants, don't throw them in public waterways. If you try to compost some plants, sometimes the seeds are hardier than you think and it's hard to kill in the compost process. So really, if you have a species you know to be invasive, just put it in a bag, put it in the trash. And for unwanted pets, we really recommend finding new homes. This is everything from going to your local aquarium shop and trying to return species. You can find your local aquarium club and try to get people to take your species. But like I said before, some people release their animals because they are sick and they have a really hard time taking care of it. And there's a little bit of telltale signs that a lot of people don't want to inherit other people's problems in their aquarium, so they're less likely to take sick fish. And so really, if you're really having a lot of issues and you can't get people to take your fish, really consult with a professional for humane disposal or euthanasia. It may seem silly to bring in your aquarium fish, but there are a lot of people who would appreciate that, I'm sure. So I threw out a lot of information over the last 40 minutes. So I'm just going to do a quick summary to just get this kind of glommed together in my mind and maybe yours as well. But the number of releases of aquarium species can be very large. And so this is aquarium releases. There, of course, like I said before, there are issues with the raising and rearing of species as well, but this is specifically for aquarium hobbyist releases. There are a lot of aquarium hobbyists. There are a lot of species being sold, and some of them are really sold in high volumes. And there are a lot of individuals who are still releasing species. So it is a big concern. And some of the species can't survive in the Great Lakes. They're not all tropical, and they're not all going to die. So these species can lead to ecological, economic, and human health impacts. And essentially avoiding purchasing or proper disposal of certain organisms really goes a long way to preventing the spread of invasive species. And with that, I will end this presentation. I'd like to thank my coworkers, Pat, Sarah, Danielle, and Alice. Ruben Keller, Krista Ganson, and Eric Gray are the folk I've been communicating with on the risk assessment tools that I mentioned previously that are helping us create these lists of alternative species. Bob Kirshner, Kay Haven-Young, Jeremy Fant, and Jacob Burns at the Chicago Botanic Garden all made suggestions about species for the water garden brochure that I mentioned as alternatives. So those are native or non-invasive species. And I think that's all I have.
All right, thanks, Greg. We've got some great questions, so let me get started with those. We have several questions dealing with the species themselves. One question is, what is the risk of establishment of the northern snakehead?
Oh, northern snakehead. That is a good question. I always like finding opportunities to read more about northern snakehead. It is a fascinating species. Like it can, I think the juveniles can cross up to what, a quarter mile, something like that. They can breathe atmospheric oxygen. They survive in low conditions. They're very aggressive. They will, I think, there's some really interesting photos or videos online of people pitting fish against northern snakeheads, and northern snakeheads are a pretty aggressive species. So if they're released, they can grow to pretty big sizes. I think they just essentially eat everything. So I think that's the big concern with them. I believe it was, 2004 is when the population was found in Maryland, and I believe, or was that 2004 when the Lacey Act was added snakehead to it? Anyhow, there was quick response by the federal government to ban the transportation of snakehead across state lines under the Lacey Act, and so there's a lot of concern at the local and federal level about that species. I believe, so that's all I know about that. Sorry to brain dump.
What are the known invasive threats from Chinese and Japanese mystery snails, and how are they harming the economy, environment, and/or human health?
Yeah, so they are a little bit more hard to pin down. There are reproductive populations, as far as I know, of the species I mentioned to Kevin Cummings of Illinois Natural History Survey from that aquarium mollusk species list. That was one of the two he picked out as being ones he would find in surveys. Typically, it's a little bit more vague. The impacts are sometimes not as well studied in some species. I'd like to think that my job would be easier if everything jumped like Asian carp. That would make everything much more easy to see and the impacts much more easy to distribute through media. So whether or not there are huge impacts of on ecosystems, human health, or the economies from Japanese trap door snail or mystery snail is a good question, and I don't know if I can answer that. But they are going down that list of ways in which species go from being aquatic species to invasive species, so they are able to establish and spread. That's what I got.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Another question that we had was, has anyone established an eDNA reference for the aquarium species that pose a high risk to the Great Lakes? I know they have an eDNA for goldfish. How many others?
That is a great question, and I have absolutely no idea. But now I'm interested, so I will do my homework tonight on eDNA and the aquarium trade.
Could you talk about what the experts see as the biggest factors that will increase the number of invasives in the future?
That's a hard question. Let me see, what would increase? Well, there's the increase in global trade. There's an increase in interest in new species, so there's always the increase from the aquarium hobby and water gardens that way. The changes in climate is a good potential for increasing species distribution. So things like a warmer winter may open the door for a lot of new species to be able to survive in Great Lakes winters. I believe there is a 50-year prediction for water hyacinth to be able to establish in the Great Lakes based on climate change models. So I think, yeah, I think those are the two that I can apply here.
You had mentioned climate change as a factor. What current data do you have on like how many potential invasives and which species could possibly come in because of climate change?
So those risk assessment tools that I mentioned before with Ruben Keller, Krista Gantz, and Aaron Gray, and I believe lots of other people worked on those as well. David Lodge, I believe, was part of that, and so is Lindsay Chatterton of the Nature Conservancy. I think either they have or they are building in climate prediction models to those risk assessments. There's a little bit of information for the mollusks, but I am not really sure about the other ones at this moment. And so people are working on it. It's a work in progress.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Another question that we had was, have there been any initiatives to provide incentives to aquarium shops to accept unwanted aquarium fish?
That's something also in the works. We are discussing that as a network, as a potential way to move forward in the future in the organisms and trade pathway. I have spoken with a few retailers as I go around and distribute materials just to kind of gauge their interest in this, and most of them are interested in taking back some species. It really depends on their carrying capacity and their state laws. Like Indiana prohibits the sale of native turtles, and so people in Indiana are more hesitant to take back turtles because of that law. And that is just conjecture. It's not based on any like formal survey. Just throwing that out there.
Great, thanks, Greg. Can we get a quick listing of organizations or groups that people new to Aquaria can contact for help with setting up a native aquarium?
Off the top of my head, NANFAN, the North American Native Fisheries Association, I believe. They, I think, have chapters in most states, if not all, and they focus on sustainable, I think, catch of native species and also how to rear those in aquariums. And I think that's a really interesting network that I'm trying to get more information from as I go forward with some of these aquarium brochures and information. So NANFA, yeah.
And how would we be able to obtain the brochures that you had mentioned once they're finished?
Oh, yeah, you can contact me. My contact information is on the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant website. If you click on Aquatic Invasive Species, it's right there. So.
Do you have other programming that you're going to be doing in the future dealing with Aquaria? Any events that people should be aware of?
We will be hosting a table at the Aquatic Experience in Schaumburg in November. That is our next planned event, but I try to give as many talks as I can to hobbyist groups that are interested in having me talk at them. And pretty much I try to set up tables and booths where I can. So I know other Great Lakes programs also do similar activities. So.
All right, thanks, Greg. Another question that we have is, do hobbyists who have native fish need to have a permit?
That depends on your state and depends on the fish.
Okay, is there a way for people to, is there a site or some place that people would be able to check on that? Yeah,
thank you for reminding me of that. Am I still changing slides here? Okay, so yeah. Under takeaim.org, state and federal contacts is a good place to start. And that is right there at the top of the takeaim.org. And I believe that is just a nice, simple list, and that should be working at the moment. So unlike the state and federal regulations database, which is on the Fritz, state and federal contacts should be good to go.
Okay, one last question. People were asking about the citations that you had throughout your presentation. Would that list of citations be available on the OIT site or in your presentation?
Oh, yeah, I could probably figure out a way to provide that. Yeah, I will include that as best I can. So we will probably house this on the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant Organisms and Trade page, like we did with our previous water garden videos of the similar ilk. And so I will try to create a list for people. So.
All right, great. Thank you, Greg. I think those were all of our questions that we had. I want to just double check to make sure. Oh, I have one more. I rarely see native fishes or native aquatic plants in pet stores or nurseries. Where can a hobbyist find stores that carry natives, and how can we encourage these retailers to carry them?
That is a good question. Especially in the aquarium trade, it is you're less likely, I think, to find native species in the aquarium trade. A lot of nurseries will actually, like for water gardens, will actually have quite a few native species available. Some of them that are more commonly in trade are, as I mentioned before, on that brochure we have. And so I try to vet the list as well as possible to find species that are things that people can find. A species that is sometimes a nuisance but also commonly in trade is hornwort, Pedophyllum demersum, also known as raccoon tail. It's commonly in trade, and that is native to this region. Again, it's sometimes a nuisance. It can become a problem, but is still considered native. And so that's one aquarium plant I know off the top of my head that's commonly sold. As far as fish go, what's it called? Ruby red shiner, is that right? Yeah. Can't really give you a straight answer on that one, but there is one species of aquarium fish. It's a ruby red something. I can't recall the name off the top of my head. I'll probably remember in about 10 minutes. But if this person is interested in that, they can check back probably at the end of the month, and we'll have a better idea for them.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I think that is, unless I missed a question, I think that is that's the majority of the questions that we have today. So I wanted to just wrap up by again thanking Greg for his willingness to talk with us today about invasives and aquaria. An excellent discussion. This webinar series is supported by the Great Lakes Sea Grant Network by a Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I also wanted to remind everyone that our survey URL for this webinar is in the chat feature. Please take a few minutes to fill that out. I also want to reference you to the resources on the Organisms in Trade website that I have there in the chat feature as well. Thank you again to Greg and all the participants on this webinar. We hope that this was beneficial, and feel free to see any of the 4 invasive species webinars that we have available on the OIT site. Thank you, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, Greg.
All right, thanks, Jill.